Imagine it's October 1978 and you're 9 years old. Your parents have just taken you to see the animated adaptation of Lord of the Rings. You like the movie, but can't help but think it would be better in live action. After leaving the theater and making your way to the lobby, you notice they've replaced the coming soon posters for new releases. One of them immediately catches your eye. Centered atop a background of gray and white clouds and fashioned almost like a chrome ring, it's the unmistakable S logo of your favorite comic book character. Even more exciting, the clouds and logo are cut through with a streak of blue, yellow, and red, the colors of his iconic costume. The blue is white at the top, yellow in the middle, and tapers into red at the bottom, suggesting a streak of motion through the clouds. While all these elements are cool, they're not what really excites you. Now, what really gets you going is the tagline at the bottom of the image, "You'll believe a man can fly." Until you read these words and processed their meaning, it hadn't occurred to you that you've never seen a man fly believably on screen. You've seen cartoons do it, and you've seen the old TV show where the character flies unconvincingly, but this poster is right. You've never actually believed a man was flying. A shiver of anticipation breaks out down your spine, and while you're too young to truly process it, a vague notion hits your consciousness. If they can make Superman fly, and I believe it, movies will never be the same. Welcome to Superhero Cinema Club, an in-depth exploration of the history of comic book movies. I'm Mark Schiff, and joining me as always is the Otis to my Mr. Luthor. It's Mike Karns.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. Otis to Luthor. I think I might prefer something like Jimmy to Superman. Maybe even like Crypto to Superman. Crypto the Superdog.
Wow. Well, you are my dog, so
appreciate that. Likewise.
You know what? Yeah, the Crypto to my Superdog. Wait, the Crypto to my Superman. Mike Karns. Yeah, there we go. All right, we got it. We got it right eventually. So Mike. I am not sure if you're aware of this. I would hope that you are. This is our very first episode. Yeah, the kickoff of Superhero Cinema Club. How you feeling? And are you excited?
I'm good, man. I'm definitely excited. I'm looking forward to the long road ahead. We have a lot of movies to talk about, a lot of decades to go through. I think we're starting with what could probably be considered the OG, and I'm excited to talk about it.
I'm excited too, Mike. Yeah, as you mentioned, the goal here of this podcast is to slowly make our way through all of I think we're into 70 plus. We might be over 100 now. I'm not sure the entire number.
A lot of episodes ahead of us to do.
Yeah, we've got a lot. We've got a long journey ahead of us. Long as Superman's flight from Krypton to planet Earth. That was about 3 years, so this should actually be much longer than that even. So longer than Superman's journey from Krypton to planet Earth. But we're very excited, and as if everything goes as planned, the idea here is to do 80s Superman movies, obviously the 70s, and then into 80s Superman movies is our first season. Move into Batman from the 90s in season 2, then on to the X-Men in season 3, and Spider-Man, the Sony movies, in season 4. So these will be coming out weekly. You'll see the next episode of season 1 a week from today in your podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. And we're going to just really get into the meat of all of them. We're going to kind of break down a lot about the movies and go through the various elements that make superhero films unique, specifically action, costuming, production design, visual effects, music. Those elements are in a lot of different movies, but part of what's fun about this particular genre of film is that there is a formula to the films, and so it's kind of easy to compare to one another and to follow along at home. I will transparently admit that this podcast is inspired quite a bit by the Rewatchables on the Ringer Podcast Network, one of my favorite podcasts. We kind of figured doing something somewhat similar to that, but focused specifically on superhero movies and going in a chronological order would be the kind of podcast I'd like to listen to, and we hope that you also enjoy listening to us. So without further ado, Mike, up, and away.
There you go. Absolutely. Let's run into the nearby phone booth and spin around or whatever he does in there and come out the other side. Let's do it.
So let's start with this, Mike, to take it back to the poster. Did you actually believe a man was flying?
I think had I been a child and was alive during this time and gone to the movie theater, I think I probably would have. I will say the flying in this movie is definitely more realistic than the way that teenage Clark Kent runs along the side of the train. I don't know what the hell he's doing there, but it's not running. Yeah, I'm gonna say yes. I did believe that he was flying, especially for the effects that we're seeing at the time. I think it's pretty good if you look at it through the lens of history.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think obviously there are some shots that are better than others. In the documentary that recently was released, Superman, on Christopher Lee Reeve's life, he talks about there was a crew of over 100 people involved just to create the flying effects. There were 3 different ways they primarily did it. They had some shots like the very first one that you see him flying from the Fortress of Solitude, and then kind of banking. Those were crane shots. They also used a lot of green screen. I think those are very clearly the worst of the visual effects. They also used rear projection for some of the shots. That was mostly used in the sequence with Lois Lane when they're on their romantic date flying through Metropolis. So
Yeah, he's holding her by the fingertips.
we'll get to that because not sure if that's how it works, but again, we'll discuss coming down the road. But there was a lot of different ways they tried to pull off this effect, and I do think that for the most part, I agree with you. They succeeded by and large, and especially relative to the time. So the way that we're going to do this, we're going to start off each episode discussing the tale of the Cape. This will focus on various aspects around the film and how it was released. So Tale of the Cape for Superman, the movie, as it's often referred to and listed. I believe that's actually what you'll see if you look it up. It's streaming now on Max. I think the title officially is Superman, the movie. Release date, December 15th, 1978. Clocks in at 2 hours and 23 minutes. The budget, Mike, was $55 million. This made it the most expensive movie ever made to that point. It's kind of interesting because I think that in some respects, this movie is obviously influential in a number of different ways, but I think the fact that it was kind of risk it for the biscuit in terms of the budget and the return, certainly a trend that has continued forward in superhero films from there on out. So they certainly risked a lot of money to get this film off the ground, so to speak, pun intended. And it was actually quite a troubled production. There are entire books written about the production to Superman, so you can definitely investigate more yourself. But the short version is a producing team, Ilya Salkind and his father Alexander, got the film rights to the film in 1974, and they hired French film producer Pierre Spengler as their producing partner on it. Now, they actually, Salkind family came from a Hollywood royalty, but they had somewhat limited experience making films up to this point. Their biggest success thus far had been the 3 and 4 Musketeers. The idea behind it was to shoot Superman 1 and Superman 2 back to back to kind of get the most bang for their buck as they did it. So once they decided on that approach, they had to settle in to find writers and directors. So first off, they approached iconic writer William Goldman, who was the screenwriter of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, also wrote the novel and eventual adaptation of The Princess Bride, as well as All the President's Men, to write the script, but personality differences got in the way. At that point, they pivoted to hire none other than Mario Puzo, aka the writer of The Godfather, to write the film. This was a huge splash. They paid him quite a bit of money. Ultimately, Mario Puzo turned in a script for both films that clocked at 555 pages. Now, Mike, if you know anything about film, basically 1 page, 1 minute. So this would have been 550 minutes. The napkin math for me would say that that is about a 9-hour film. So it'd have been four.
Let's go.
I'm kind of with it. I know Zack Snyder probably learned that fact and thought to himself, "You son of a bitch,
release the Puzo cut. Let's hear it." I'm in.
Release the Puzo cut. Yes, let's do it. Obviously, that wasn't really going to work, and ultimately, it was Robert Benton, who was the writer of Bonnie and Clyde, eventually Kramer versus Kramer and Ang Lee's The Ice Storm, quite a good film. Benton and his Bonnie and Clyde co-writer, David Newman, were brought in for rewrites, along with David Newman's wife, Leslie Newman. Nevertheless, this script wasn't still good enough, and Tom Mankiewicz, the nephew of the Mank of the David Fincher film, and quite a famous Hollywood writing family, came in to do a rewrite. He eventually claimed that not a single word of Mario Puzo's script was used. That's 550 pages down the drain. However, the Writers Guild was not happy with him kind of doing uncredited rewrites, so Mankiewicz was eventually credited with a creative consultant, and in the end, Superman's writing credits go to Puzo, the Newmans, and Benton, with story credit going to Mario Puzo. Pretty wild, just getting the writing done. Now they had to find a director. And Mike, let me tell you, they talked to the cream of the crop of the late 70s cinema to get this done. We're talking about Steven Spielberg, William Friedkin, who had done The French Connection and The Exorcist, our guy Francis Ford Coppola, and even a little young filmmaker named George Lucas. Now, if we're doing a fantasy world draft and you can pick any of those four to actually direct Superman, which one of those guys would you take?
Spielberg. Spielberg is easily my top pick. He knows exactly what to do to capture film through the eyes of the wonder of a child, and a superhero film, I think, is right up his alley for that. I want to see him do a superhero movie today. It's never too late for my guy to come out and do the next Batman or Superman or whatever we want him to do. I think Spielberg's the top choice.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think actually George Lucas potentially could have done it. I think that stock probably was lowered upon Howard the Duck, which I don't believe he directed, but was involved in making and is one of the great catastrophes of 1980 movies. Unfortunately, I don't believe we will be covering Howard the Duck on the podcast here, but go ahead and watch that one if you'd like. But yeah,
subscribe to our Patreon page. You'll get that.
That's right. That's going to be a bonus Patreon only. But yeah, you're totally right. It's actually kind of surprising that Steven Spielberg in his long and storied career has never directed a superhero film, because I totally agree. I think he'd be great for certain types of characters, the more, I would say, whimsical. Frankly, Superman is kind of the ideal character, I would say, for Steven Spielberg to direct. Maybe even Shazam or something, with where there's like a sort of something with kids, because he's obviously great with that. But yeah, I think I'd certainly prefer to see that. Coppola, I don't think it would have been great. And Friedkin, not quite in his wheelhouse. So obviously they weren't able to get any of those guys. It was a very tortured search for a director, and they ultimately ended up settling on a younger director by the name of Richard Donner. After seeing The Omen, that was the kind of the film that got them excited about Richard Donner. They paid him $1 million to direct both films. However, the production was not going well by the time that he came aboard, and they had to scrap a lot of different things, including the plan to shoot in Italy because of their casting choice of one Marlon Brando as Jor-El. Now, this was another very significant decision in the production. They basically decided that if we're going to make this movie and we're going to spend all this money, we want to bring in Hollywood A-list actors. Again, because The Godfather was the absolute sensation of the 70s, they looked to Marlon Brando. He wasn't particularly interested and really kind of saw this more as an opportunity to get a huge paycheck that he could then use to fund other projects, including a documentary about the Native Americans. But ultimately, they did give him the part because he agreed of a salary of over $3 million and 11.75% of the box office gross. That would total $19 million. Brando got paid quite well for this. The next big
maybe like 1 week's worth of shooting, would you say?
No, Mike, come on, give him some credit. He decided to shoot for 12 days.
Okay.
He did not memorize his dialogue before showing up to work, and we'll talk about it here in just a couple minutes, but I think that work shows. So Brando gets paid a ton of money to come in. Now they got to cast Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor, the role goes to a lot of different people, or potentially a lot of different people, including Dustin Hoffman, who turned down the role. Eventually, they do settle on Gene Hackman, another one of the big 70s actors who obviously had just starred in French Connection, among other great 70s films, and paid him $2 million. Now, Mike, they've spent a lot of money. If you can do the math, that's basically 10% of the budget going to 2 stars in the movie. If you add in the million for Richard Donner, that's over 10%. So after thinking about some A-list stars, they decided to pivot to more of an unknown for the role of Superman. That being said, this does lead to some of the great what ifs in film casting history. So I'm going to give you a list of names. Tell me which one of these you'd prefer to see in the role.
All right.
Robert Redford, Burt Reynolds, James Caan, Warren Beatty, and Paul Newman were offered the part. Which of those four would you want to see?
I honestly don't think any of those guys are a good fit for Superman. So I feel like it's a kind of a losing hand of cards here. But I think I might go Redford if he bulks up a little bit. I mean, he's got a good smile. You know, he can do that wink at the camera as he's flying by. He's definitely good looking enough to battle with Christopher Reeve. You know, they both have that charm and charisma on screen to play Superman. So gun to the head, I think I'd go with him.
Yeah, I'd probably lean a little more towards Warren Beatty just because I can see him more clearly in that suit because of his dark hair. Paul Newman, I think, is an amazing actor. I think he's like one of the great screen presences of all time. And so I feel like he probably could pull off the gravitas a little bit. Definitely not buying Burt Reynolds. So actually,
Superman
I think I
with
might.
a mustache is what I figure there.
Exactly. I'd actually maybe go with Paul Newman, I think, for me. Other people were gunning for the role as it was obviously going to be a huge film. These included Bruce Jenner, Sly Stallone, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger obviously had a super ripped physique and would definitely look like the strongest man alive. But as they point out in the Christopher Reeve documentary, as soon as he started talking, the whole truth, justice, and the American way thing kind of goes out the window. And
I'd say that's just call that the accent from Krypton. You know, you could find a way to write around his accent there.
actually love that idea, but I just, even with how ripped Superman becomes in later iterations, I just think it's a little too far. James Brolin, Nick Nolte, Christopher Walken, Chris Christopherson, Charles Bronson, and John Voight were all approached, if not ever offered the role. Again, just really hard to see any of those people
It's
in that
basically
role.
anybody who was a male actor working in Hollywood in 1977.
That's right. Yeah, they were extremely desperate and trying to find someone. However, they eventually settled on a relatively unknown Juilliard grad by the name of Christopher Reeve. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this, Mike. I think that this is the most iconic in terms of actors that we associate in superhero roles. I think there's only one other person who potentially would take this, and we won't hear from him for another literally 30 years. I think he is the GOAT actor in terms of superhero role casting. What do you think?
Who's the person you're thinking of?
RDJ as Iron Man would be the only one, in my opinion, that potentially could compete.
I thought you were going to say Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, but
That's
yeah,
that's a really excellent point as well. I think that he's in there.
Yeah, I mean, you say the word Superman, and the image that comes to mind is Christopher Reeve, I think, for most people, and couldn't have asked for a better guy to play the role. I know he's an amazing man, offset, and he had such the perfect look for the role, especially in the suit. I mean, I love Henry Cavill. I think he's a close second, but it's just too iconic for Christopher Reeve.
I completely agree. Obviously, I was popping off about potential GOAT. I actually think I would give it to him only because even Hugh Jackman has other parts that we can still think of with him, whereas Christopher Reeve, his career was both completely skyrocketed as well as kind of kneecapped by this part. I think it was something that I don't think he resented the role necessarily, but I do think that it was extremely difficult for him to really break out in any other way. I'm not sure that I've seen another Christopher Reeve movie beyond Superman, and I've seen a lot of films. I mean, I don't know if you have. None of them were really big hits at all. He did make a real intentional point to try to go to different roles. He was a Juilliard trained actor and really didn't want to be kind of stuck in the idea of or just typecast as Superman for his entire career. But when you're just such an iconic character and you're really kind of break out on the scene playing that character, it's extremely hard to get out of.
Yeah, the only other thing I know of from him that he did was I think after his accident, he did a remake of Rear Window because it was a character bound to a wheelchair, was something that he could play. So I haven't seen that, but yeah, I'd have to peruse his IMDb to, take a look at what else he did besides Superman.
Yeah, I would really encourage people to watch the Christopher Reeve documentary that's on Max right now. It just premiered recently, and it's a really touching film. If you're younger and you're kind of not familiar with Christopher Reeve's story, he obviously played Superman, and then in the mid-90s, he was injured and became a quadriplegic after a horse accident. After that point, it was obviously really shocking for the American consciousness to see Christopher Reeve as Superman in such a position, and he became a real advocate for disability rights, a real hero and champion. And the irony obviously there is that he played a superhero, and then he's injured and actually becomes a real superhero in real life through his work for disability awareness and that community. A really, really honorable man. And that movie really gives you great insight into, the ups and downs with his life and career and everything. So highly encouraged to watch that, and much respect and rest in peace to Christopher Reeve. However, I would also say this, Mike. There is one other Christopher Reeve thing that I think people around our ages associate with him, and that would be Eminem jokes and lyrics. For whatever reason, Eminem has dissed Christopher Reeve 44 times on his various songs and albums. I'm an Eminem fan, I'm not going to lie. I put together, Mike, this list of a few different Eminem Christopher Reeve disses. I'd love to hear your favorite. First off of Who Knew, we got Skibbity Bebop, Christopher Reeves, Sonny Bono Skis, Horses Hitting Some Trees.
That's not bad.
That one's my favorite. Purple Pills, it's Mr. Mischief with a hat trick up his sleeve to roll up on you like Christopher Reeves.
I don't know if I like that one because it's actually Christopher Reeve.
Well, he basically calls Christopher Reeves every single time. So if that bugs you, it's basically every single reference. On the song Rain Man, which I think a lot of people consider potentially Eminem's single worst song, I actually kind of like that one for some odd, weird reason. He raps like Yoda on it, and he actually takes credit for Christopher Reeve's injury on Rain Man. Kind of a bizarre thing. And the last option here for you, I'm Back. It's a sick world we live in these days. Slim, for Pete's sake, put down Christopher Reeve's legs.
There's no line he won't cross.
No, there's not. So we got to get you on record here, Mike. Which of those bars do you personally endorse and fully support when it comes to making fun of Christopher Reeve, which you're definitely about to do by doing this?
Wasn't there? I think there was a lyric on his new album too.
There is. Even his newest, yes, even on his newest album, Christopher Reeve has passed away I think he's been dead for almost 20 years. He's still dissing him from beyond the grave.
I'll go with Who Knew as well out of this list. I think that's my favorite just because it has Skibbity Bebop in it. I think it's hard to rap on that. Christopher
Reeves. That's definitely my favorite. Look, I don't really. Eminem. There are rumors. You're a fan of this podcast. If those rumors are true, we'd love to hear from you directly. Obviously, I don't know why he dissed Christopher Reeve 44 times, which was an astonishing number to discover. But the big thing with Eminem is that he's just scatological as hell, right? Like that's the whole deal with Eminem. There's no line he won't cross, and by picking on potentially like the most beloved celebrity in America at the time, that just illustrated what a deranged mind that we were dealing with in Slim Shady. So, Mike, when all the casting, the shooting's done, which they actually shot up until, so the movie, as I mentioned, came out December 15th, 1978. They were shooting as late as October of 1978. So I think that is where some of the visual effects, issues come in. I know that Richard Donner said that If he was able to have a little more time filming, some of those issues would have been corrected. I'm sure every director probably feels that way, but I do think you can really see it, especially towards the end of the film. That being said, the movie comes out and it is an absolute smash. It's a sensation. It grosses $134 million domestic, 166 internationally, for a grand total of $300 million worldwide. This is one of the biggest releases of all time. And it was, in the end, the number 2 movie of 1978. An astonishing fact, considering how late it was released in the year. I'm assuming that this was in total. That being said, for the calendar year of 1978, Grease was more successful than Superman. It was utterly dwarfed, however, by a movie released in 1977. Mike, name that movie.
Star Wars?
That's correct. Star Wars,
right.
Which came out in May of 1977, still managed to be the highest grossing movie of 1978. Unbelievable when you think about how fast films come and go from theaters in the year of our Lord 2025. It's really astonishing. Superman was not only a huge commercial success, it was also a huge critical hit. It was nominated for 3 Oscars, including Best Editing, Best Original Score, and Best Sound. At the time, they would just kind of come up with special achievement Oscars to give out to films, and so they did that, and they just gave Superman a special achievement Oscar for visual effects. There's a lot to talk about when it comes down to Superman's legacy. I'm just going to put this out there, and I think listeners may already sense that I have a flair for hyperbole. However, I think it's somewhat indisputable that this is one of the most influential movies ever made. First off, it set a template for all superhero movies to come from here forward, both in terms of the narrative and from a big bet, big reward standpoint. Not only was its legacy across all of superhero cinema, but it spawned 3 direct sequels and another sequel that we'll be discussing that came out decades later. It also, as I mentioned, introduced the idea of big movie star stunt casting. This is something we've seen really in perpetuity through superhero movies, putting really famous actors into these roles and hoping that that'll help boost ticket sales. Mike, what do you think about Superman's legacy?
If we're talking about legacy, that's, to me, we're going to talk about comics and TV shows, and Superman he's here to stay, I think, when it comes to after this movie's released. Overall, I mean, it's hit and miss. There's some things in there that I really like. There's some things in there that I think you can just probably throw right in the trash and be okay with that. But we've got a lot of good Superman content out there. I think there's definitely things that I would say I would consider myself a fan of. So I mentioned Henry Cavill. I think Man of Steel is an excellent movie. Wouldn't exist without this movie. I love the Superman animated TV show. I think that image of Paul Dini's Superman is probably, like, just the way that he looks is very visually inspired by Christopher Reeve. So again, wouldn't exist without him. Or this movie.
Yeah, it's you make a great point, and I think that's one of the reasons why, for my own sort of memories in my own lifetime, they don't really start until the Batman movies of the 90s and late 80s. So we kind of considered starting our podcast with those. However, I do feel like the Superman movies are almost encapsulate everything about superhero cinema, the good and the bad, all within these, 4, 5, 6 films, adjacent films that, came out. And I think that's something that really, when you look at the full totality of superhero films, right, you got to take the good with the bad. And there's some great films. There's some classic films even. I do think that, there are undeniably incredible moments in the Superman series, and I think there are undeniably cringeworthy, embarrassing moments in the Superman series, not just the future ones, but within the Christopher Reeve films as well. So it definitely set the template for everything to come. From here on out, Mike, it was up, up, and away. If it wasn't clear by now, you should probably go ahead and rewatch Superman before going any further. We're going to discuss the plot, different moments. So it's probably best to rewatch this. It's now available on Max to stream at home. But I find the intro to this movie quite compelling, Mike, and we'll get to more of that later. But I think one of the coolest parts about the movie is that there's a short intro, and then we're hit with bam, the iconic John Williams score. Now, as I mentioned before, this was nominated for Best Score at the Oscars. John Williams lost Best Original Score to Giorgio Moroder for his theme to Midnight Express, an absolute banger that's been sampled actually by a lot of hip hop artists. Love that theme. That being said, I mean, this is a pretty iconic theme from an extremely iconic film composer. He is the second most nominated artist of all time at the Academy Awards, trailing only Walt Disney himself. He had already been nominated 10 times by the time he was nominated for this, including for Jaws. That was his second win. Fiddler on the Roof was his first. I think we got to sort this out here, Mike. First off, is John Williams the greatest film composer of all time?
He has to be. I mean, come on, look at his body of work. Star Wars, E.T., Jaws, like you said, this. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. He's working well into his, what is he, in his 90s now?
He is 92 years old now.
It's ridiculous. I mean, it's mind-boggling to see what one man can do. He's like, I'm sure other film composers feel like Salieri to his Mozart. You know, they look at him and see what he does, and they just shake their head in jealousy. Like it's amazing.
Yeah, I think you have to give him the GOAT belt, like no matter what. I think there's a separate question, which is he your personal favorite film composer?
Man. I don't know. I mean, Howard Shore, of course, because he did Lord of the Rings alone, I think is up there. But I've also been a big fan of James Newton Howard for a long time. But
what about your guy Hans Zimmer? I know you just saw him in concert recently.
How could I forget Hans? I don't even know what I'm thinking right now. I mean, I love Hans, and it was seeing him in concert was incredible. It's you know, it's kind of like picking like who's your favorite Beatle or just who's your favorite band of all time kind of thing. It always kind of rotates on the day, it seems like.
I personally am a little bit more of a Ennio Morricone fan, just because I think I like listening to Morricone's music at home, and I don't really throw on John Williams scores necessarily. But yeah, just in terms of his accomplishments and what he's meant to films. And I think the thing about John Williams specifically is that he's really able to distill the thematic essence of whatever the movie's about into the music, to the point that the sounds are almost inextricable from the characters and those things. So like, I'm going to throw out a few different John Williams scores. I'd like you to pick your favorite, but I think all of these are emblematic of what I'm talking about in terms of taking what the film is about and translating it into sound. So he obviously got his second win for Jaws. His third win was for Star Wars. Then he gets nominated for Superman. He goes on to do Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T. He did Home Alone, which I was a little bit surprised. I didn't remember that it was a John Williams score. Jurassic Park and Harry Potter even. I mean, that's an incredible, diverse body of work. Which of those would you say is your personal favorite?
Personal favorite, I would have to go Star Wars, and actually I would say specifically Empire Strikes Back. I think that score for the second movie is that he really upped his game. We have things like the Imperial March in there that became iconic in their own respect. The whole suite of the Millennium Falcon when they're flying through the asteroid belt is masterful. But I will say honorable mention of E.T. because it's so moving, that score, and there are classes that are taught about how impactful music can be in a scene where they show the ending of E.T. where they subtract his music, and it's just a bunch of characters just staring at each other blankly, and you don't really know what you're supposed to be feeling unless John Williams is telling you what to be feeling. So honorable mention there. But yeah, Empire for me is my favorite John Williams score of all time.
Wow, that's an incredible note. I did not realize that. But yeah, that would totally make sense. There's a lot of funny, Instagrams and TikToks with, subbing out music to different soundtracks. And again, it's just inextricable, his contribution to these films. I'm It's not a deep cut, obviously. None of these films, they're all among the most popular films of all time. I'm going to go Jurassic Park personally. I remember when that movie came out, I had just read the book. I was like still kind of a kid. It was like one of the first adult books I read. And, there's obviously the big booming parts, but the slower, like the slower parts, I mean, absolutely beautiful and whimsical. And I think that to me, like for personal reasons, I think Jurassic Park is probably my favorite for John Williams. So John Williams' contribution to the success of Superman is, like I said, inextricable, and it hits you right away. Then you get these like 3D credits that are rendered in this kind of fantastic way. Again, just signaling to the audience like this is going to be a really big blockbuster type film. Now, I do want to call something out here because I find this extremely odd. The credits order, Mike. The first name we get is Marlon Brando. Then we get Gene Hackman. Then we get the actual title to the film. Then it's Christopher Reeve. Now, this is something that will come up actually in Batman when Jack Nicholson gets top billing over Michael Keaton. Really weird to me, though, especially Brando over Hackman because of the limited screen time for Brando. Again, I know that he had just won an Oscar, but I don't love it. And what I love even less is after Christopher Reeve, you get Ned Beatty, Jackie Cooper, Glenn Ford, Trevor Howard, and then Margot Kidder. Now, with respect to all four of those actors, Margot Kidder is clearly the number 2 in this film. And for her to be 7th on the call sheet, I am at a loss for words. We'll get into my feelings around her contributions to this film shortly, but very, very odd credit sequence here. And again, I think it just really emphasizes the stunt casting that was going on with a lot of stuff. Now, I'm going to also throw out something slightly controversial and say, personally, I think the theme coming into Krypton after the credits is maybe the best piece of music in the entire film. It's so lifting, and as the camera's pushing in on, past the sun, the red sun of Krypton into Krypton, it's really, I think it's very stirring what he does with his music. And now we get the introduction of Krypton, and Mike, let me tell you, I've got a lot of questions. As I mentioned before, I think Marlon Brando is not good in this movie. I think he is almost nakedly contemptuous to the material. I think that shows in his performance, and I think it specifically shows in the fact that he says Krypton. Do you notice that?
Yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah.
He doesn't say Krypton, the planet Krypton. Unbelievably annoying. I'm sure the director was like, can you say Krypton? And he said, no, I can't. I can't stand it. Now, I want to get in specifically to a couple questions about the jurisprudence as it relates on Krypton. Now, first off, we get Jor-El, Brando's character, with this translucent rod, and he's like, the evidence is all here. So, like, the evidence of their crime is being held in a translucent rod? I don't really understand that.
I guess is that it's the same technology that we see Clark actually inserting these crystals, and then it displays, a video image of his dad. It's probably something similar to that, where they say we've got here. This is like our CD-ROM drive, right? This is here's the disc, and it's this giant rod. That's just the technology they use on that planet. So here's our evidence, and you can go insert it into that crystal slot over there, and that will show you exactly what happens. That was kind of my thinking as to why they chose to do that.
Actually makes some sense in the logic of the film itself. I will say I do like the sort of hula hoop jail, like, like the bars instead of bars that are just moving hula hoops that trap them inside. And I don't really see how you could get out of that. I guess if you moved really swiftly, there is like a little opening, but
it's like the same technology of like the spinning tires that sit out front of like a car shop, the 2 tires that balance on each other.
Exactly.
No, it was visually, it worked, I thought, for what they were trying to do. Yeah.
That was cool. Now, I don't think that the Phantom Zone, which is the flat glass thing that they're put into. I'm not sure if they don't refer to it as the Phantom Zone, but that's what it's referred to in canon. So I have a question about this. They are unrepentant, right? Like, especially Zod is like, join me. He's like, it's not too late, Jor-El. I'm trying to even actively recruit you to my side, all the way up until the point where the Phantom Zone glass comes flying through the ceiling, trapping them. Now, immediately, they are like, I'm sorry, no, no. They're stuck in this glass. This leads me to believe, Mike, the Phantom Zone is cruel and unusual punishment. I think that again, that's an American legal system standard. I don't know if they have those same legal standards, but if I was like a lawyer, I would be like, this is inhumane. You cannot banish them into the Phantom Zone. They're literally going to spin in space for eternity. Like, they can't even die. Everyone on their planet dies almost immediately after this happens. I mean, if he wanted to sentence him to death, they could have just literally died with him and everyone else on the planet if they just kept him in the weird hula hoop prison. But instead, they put him in this trapped glass, and they're just shrieking in absolute horror, pain, cruel and unusual punishment. I would certainly fight that if I was their lawyer.
Do we know what they did exactly? Is it explained?
I mean, they wanted to take over the planet, and basically, it seems like it's a military coup situation. They wanted to, because he's General Zod, he wanted to do a military coup on the planet.
Yeah. So we don't know the specifics around that, and if he murdered a bunch of people to make that happen. We do see in the next movie that they are, in fact, they have no problem murdering people. So I don't know. Maybe this is it's just the equivalent of, life without parole for them. I know that they don't age or die or whatever in the Phantom Zone. It's just an eternity of being trapped, which does sound pretty cruel and unusual. You're right. But
rough, man. It's rough.
Whatever. Zod's a supervillain. He deserves it. I don't know.
Fair enough. Another issue I have with the Krypton thing. Okay, so they're putting Superman, Kal-El, into this, ship that's going to send him to Earth. And like, Mom is just like pretty chill. She's like, I mean, if you had to literally give your only son away, you're about to die. You're shooting your kid into outer space. Who knows if he's going to make it on this perilous journey? And she's just like looking like a little sad. I don't know, man. I wanted a little bit more from Mom there, like a little more tragedy.
The next point, I'll go into this a little bit more, but this has always been a problem with the Superman backstory in other movies too. It's been kind of a joke. Is just like, why doesn't our son get a hologram of me? Too. I'm his mother. Like, what the hell?
Great point. I mean, he has no relationship with his mother, even though his dad literally tutors him for 12 years later on. Nothing from Mom, though. Yeah. Then this is the part. Now, I understand that there's going to be this, the Fortress of Solitude. He's going to actually mentor young Superman and help him become like Superman, go through his wilderness moment. But he says, and I quote, "See my life through your eyes as your life will be seen through mine." I can see how Superman can see his life, right? He's doing this recording. He has a thing. He's about to die. He dies within 5 minutes. So isn't it more like a recording? Does his consciousness kind of get transferred to some extent? And so he can kind of respond and react?
Yeah, I think it's that. I think he's uploading his consciousness into like a digital platform kind of thing. They have the ability to do that.
I mean, that opens up a whole other can of worms in terms of survival of their planet and their race. But, fair enough. That line was just...
Why don't they do that with everybody and not just Jor-El?
Exactly. Yeah. And the other part, so Jor-El is a lawyer litigating the case. Then he's also clearly some kind of politician. But then also he's a scientist who is predicting that the sun is about to... I mean, you want to talk about Superman? Superman's dad is way more impressive in terms of his accomplishments. That's like a hell of a resume. Now, I initially had a note here about the kryptonite being part of the package because he drops in like a little green rod into the package. However, that green rod is what he throws into the Arctic Circle to become the Fortress of Solitude. So that made a little more sense. And then, of course, there's a separate packet, kryptonite that Lex Luthor will use against Superman. That hits Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. he says like, oh, we've got to go to Ethiopia and Addis Ababa to get it. So I'm assuming that was a remnant of the planet exploding that made it, like a meteorite from the planet itself that made it there.
Shards of the planet that have come to Earth and experienced some kind of radiation exposure as it travels through space, and that's why it's powerful enough to hurt Superman or something. I don't know exactly, but
Okay.
that's yeah. I mean, sure, it's space radiation, and ultimately that is hurting him.
Yeah, that was a little confusing for me there initially too, where I was just like, why would they put the thing that it's like putting poison in your baby's crib and being like, I'm gonna send you on this long perilous trip, but don't eat the poison. It doesn't make any sense. Superman travels from infant. He looks like he's maybe 6 months old. By the time he gets to planet Earth, he's like, I want to say 3, maybe 3.5. He can kind of talk a little. So he was in space by himself for 3.5 years. Now,
Full head of hair.
Yeah, glorious black hair. He looks amazing. But knowing now what we know about attachment theory when it comes to raising children, like I feel like Superman would be deeply antisocial if he had to spend his entire infancy by himself, like coming to planet Earth. Like I don't know, that just kind of struck me on rewatch. I was like, oh my God, like how did he turn out to be so good? Maybe Kryptonians don't need that, but
Maybe
attachment.
that's why his dad thought to give him the building blocks for a fortress of solitude, you know.
Great point, Mike. What do you think about Teen Superman?
He looks like he's 25, but I think other than that, he served the purpose for 20 minutes of screen time to fill to show what it's like to be an outcast in this environment, I think, of Smallville, Kansas. I mean, I thought he was pretty good overall. I don't know who I would pick to replace him as far as 70s actors go for someone who might be more age appropriate or something like that. But, and like I said, he sure does run weird, but it looks like he's riding an invisible bicycle. But
Yeah, that was. It's funny because, as you said, like the running effects on that are actually maybe the single worst visual effect in the whole movie, and it's like they could make a man fly but not run next to a train convincingly at high speeds.
it haunts my dreams at night. I don't know what to tell you.
Fun fact about Teen Superman: they actually overdubbed the actor with Christopher Reeve's voice instead of using that guy's voice, which he apparently didn't learn about until he was at the premiere or whatever watching it, and then he's like, oh wait, they overdubbed me. Yeah, that's cold, a little bit cold, not gonna lie. I will say this, I think this is some of the best shot stuff in the film. I love the cinematography in this part. We'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I really like when he journeys up and creates the Fortress of Solitude. And that whole sequence, I think, is one of the better ones in the entire film. You kind of get a lot of exposition from Brando. He finally comes back and he's talking about stuff. And with all of what he says, and I think all of kind of the obvious symbolism, the only son sent to Earth symbolism, the mother who didn't actually conceive him, you probably get where I'm going here, and I'm just going to put it plainly. Mike, is Superman Jesus?
There's a lot of matching symbolism there, which is really interesting considering Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, two Jewish Americans, conceived of this character. So for them to try and create a Ubermensch Christ figure in a way is pretty fascinating to me and always has been. I know stuff like Man of Steel really hits hard on that. You know, he goes and talks to a priest at one point. They ask him his age and he says he's 33, which was the age of Christ when he died. It's, and you said it too, the only father, or the father sending his only son down to Earth, you know, for the sake of the world, to save mankind, to take on our burdens, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, the symbolism right. is very thick here.
Yeah, I mean, he's not allowed, he has incredible abilities, but he's not able to use them to meddle in human history, but rather serve as an example that others should aspire toward. That's very Jesus-y. He spent 12 years in the wilderness of space, so to speak, which is similar to, you know, Jesus's time in the wilderness. And yeah, you called it out. There's an explicit line. It is for this reason, their capacity for good, that I have sent them my only son. That is almost straight up out of the Bible. Now, there's some interesting theories as far as it goes back to the Jewish Americans and Jesus thing. And there's a whole book on this as well. I have not read it, but basically the thesis is that, yeah, Superman is Jesus, but Clark Kent is the Nebish Jewish person who is kind of clumsy and awkward. And so that's where they actually put more of themselves in that character. And I'm not, again, I think some of the Christ comparisons are maybe a little on the nose from what they themselves were doing. But when you certainly look at it in the context of this film, I think there's really clear religious connotations. And to your point, even more maybe in future installments in the film. So,
I mean, he dies and comes back to life very famously in the death and return of Superman after he fights Doomsday in the comics. And it takes a little bit of time for that to happen. It's definitely, it can be pretty heavy handed at times. I know he's a comic book character, which we always kill off and bring back all the time. To answer your question, is he Jesus? I'm just going to go ahead and say yes. He's Jesus who can fly and shoot laser beams out of his eyes.
That's the Jesus I worship. When I sit down to pray before dinner, say, "Dear Jesus, with your laser eyes, please."
Tuxedo t-shirt.
Tuxedo t-shirt. So, we won't really go beat by beat through the movie here on out, but I did kind of want to go through the beginning because I do think that, this shares some similarities with 70s films like Jaws and other ones in that they make you wait a really long time before you actually get Superman. And, I think it's worth it. I think that also kind of sets a template for origin stories and superhero films to come. And I do think that, that these are really successful, even as much as we're clowning on the Krypton stuff. Like, it looks cool from a visual standpoint. It does look otherworldly. By the time that we finally get to the sort of second half of the film and when we're really getting into the meat of it, it feels really earned. And I really appreciate that about this movie. So now let's jump into the fun, big stuff. And let's talk about the action in this film. And I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the best action scene? Now, we have a few different options here. We've got the helicopter rescue. That's the sort of very first Superman kind of putting himself out there for the rest of the city to see. That is followed almost immediately by the montage of help where he saves a plane, he gets some crooks on a boat. Pretty cool. And then, of course, the huge climax, the missile climax. We'll get into that a lot more later in a lot of detail. But Mike, which of these three action sequences was your favorite?
My original thought was the missile time reversal, but the more I thought about it, I do feel like it's kind of a cop out with him. Just as cool as it is to see a man turn the world in reverse to make time go backwards, it doesn't really make sense from a relativistic physics standpoint. So I'm going to keep it simple here. Montage of help. But I just think this is the most fun the movie is having at this point is let's just see what we can do with him. He's going to, like you said, he's going to get the crooks on a boat and all that. I think helicopter rescue is kind of wrapped up in montage of help in a way because it's like one right after the other. But this is the most fun the movie's having at this point, letting him go around and just help random people.
Yeah, you said it well. It's kind of odd considering what is going to happen with the form of really clear, big action set pieces throughout, superhero movies. And there's one big one at the beginning, and then you wait a little while, and there's another one. I mean, there's almost like a rhythm to them, and this movie subverts all of those. And in fact, to your point, the helicopter rescue happens, and then it basically goes immediately into the montage of him helping. And so you're kind of really hit with a ton of Superman stuff all in one blast after waiting for a long time for it. I personally actually am going to go with helicopter rescue because I think there's a few different things that are really cool. I really like the way that, it all starts with the helicopter getting kind of tangled up in the cables and then slamming in the side of the building, and the door swings open, and it's kind of from a point of view like she would be stepping out like normally, but then it's a fall down to, and it like zooms in on her face, and she's like, oh my God, like that's a cool shot. There's a cool shot of the camera's like posted on top of the emergency vehicle as it's pulling up to the scene. I think And then they're like the way that they shoot him when it's over with, it's kind of they shoot him from up above, flying. He takes off, he waves down at people. And apparently, like this was like the hardest shot to get of all of the flying sequences because it's not only him, like you can clearly see him lifting off the ground, but then he has to kind of lean down and then keep going. I mean, it's a really cool shot. I love that, she asks like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "A friend." I mean, that's just classic line. And the other last thing is so he catches Lois, then the helicopter itself starts falling from the building and he catches it. But, you'd think, right, if you're like pulling a helicopter, you pull from behind. He just, no, it's just like, it's nothing. I can lift it above my head with Lois Lane, a woman in my arm. I mean, it just does such a good job of really showing how strong he really is.
Like he's a bodybuilder or something, lifting a weight up, doing a
Exactly.
suplex or something. Yeah.
Exactly. And actually, I forgot to mention this before, but this is another fun fact about the film. David Prowse, who's the guy in the Darth Vader costume in the Star Wars films, he was Christopher Reeve's personal trainer that got him into shape to play the role of Superman. He was the one that got him in like his exercise routine, and he gained, I think, like out of 30 pounds of muscle. Like he got super ripped for the role. And it was all thanks to the guy that played Darth Vader. Let's talk now about the best non-action scene in the movie. I know we already went through some of the early stuff, the Krypton explosion, teenage Clark, the office introduction. So this is kind of where we jump in after the big Fortress of Solitude moment. Then the Lex Luthor introduction, and then finally date night with Lois Lane. Which of these was your favorite out of those options?
I think I'm going to go office introduction here. Just it's the first time we see Christopher Reeve playing the bumbling Clark Kent. Again, you can tell people are having fun in this scene. Margot Kidder is doing her best Lois Lane that she can do here. Apparently, she's a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, but she doesn't know how to spell a lot, which has always kind of baffled me. I just think, he's holding his briefcase. He's got papers in his arms. He's dropping everything all the time. Like it's a great showcase of his acting abilities that he learned from Juilliard, and he's just killing it in this scene. I just love it.
I completely agree with you. And I'm actually going to go one step further and say, I think this is my favorite scene in the entire film. I think the way that all of the characters are all introduced is genius. I love her first line, her introduction. How many T's in bloodletting? Then Jimmy Olsen asks, "What are you writing?" And she says, "An ode to spring." I mean, that's good. That's good stuff. And in fact, it also does set what I think a lot of people observed at the time, and I'm sure you noticed watching it. There's a lot of like kind of goofball comedy in this movie. I mean, they really lay into the humor, and I actually think they pull it off, which is a little bit astonishing. Now, I think some of the Lex Luthor, the bumbling henchman stuff is certainly less successful in my opinion. But the tone from once, we're through the origin story and now in the second half of the film, there's a lot of comedy in this. And I really do think that this scene is almost like zany and madcap in a lot of ways. And it culminates with, to your point, him, saving Lois faster than a speeding bullet, right? And like snatching it out of midair. And the way it all just flows together from his first day in the office and all of that. I think, Perry White is pretty awesome in this. Jackie Cooper in that role, I think, does an excellent job. So yeah, I actually think this is probably on rewatch. This is like my favorite scene in the entire film. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the way they show the superheroes' powers. This is going to be something that is one of the topics we're going to discuss on all of these. And really the theme here is like, does the film represent the comic book abilities of the character in a cool and representative way? I actually think the movie scores somewhat lower on this. Now, as we mentioned, the big thing with this was like, he's going to fly. You're going to believe it. And we do. And that's cool. But there's some really questionable stuff when it comes to the rest of his power set in this. Now, specifically, the date night. We are alluded to it earlier. They're flying around. I mean, it's cool. It's dreamy. I actually kind of like it. It's very 70s, and it kind of, we'll talk a little bit about the production, some of the people involved later. I think it connects back to that. But at a certain point, he's not even touching her. Their fingertips. His finger cannot pass the ability to fly onto someone just by physical contact, right? I mean, that's never been.
I didn't understand that either. I couldn't tell if he was just holding up her entire body weight with just his fingertips or if he was giving her the ability to fly. I mean, there's a lot about Superman's powers that kind of just don't make sense. It's just the writers say, well, he can do anything, so let's just do this. And it just doesn't make sense, you know. At some point, we have to have rules for what he can and can't do, even though he can do everything. But yeah, this date night is very confusing.
And those rules, that's actually one of the biggest things that have Superman's been criticized for. He's so powerful, he's kind of boring because it's like, oh, what can't he do? He has ice breath and laser eyes. He can fly. He's the strongest man alive, and they gave him so much power that there's like almost, nothing that can defeat him except for kryptonite, which is, they had to come up with that, I believe, later in the comic books just to kind of, okay, actually, there is some degree of vulnerability with this guy. With that being said, how are you going to make this man turn back time by flying around the world? That is so lazy, frankly, in its construction. First of all, I don't believe that Superman has ever done that in the comic books. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some stuff somewhere in the canon. We'll talk a little bit more about our comics reading later, but I haven't read a ton of Superman in my day, so I could be totally mistaken here. But to give someone the ability to just turn back time like that is, I always say it wrong, but Deus Ex Machina or whatever, however you say that term, like the forced contrivance that settles and resolves the story. It bothers me so much that the climax of this movie is him flying around the Earth, which also, to that point, if you're going to reverse the polarity of Earth, wouldn't that just like screw up the poles and like magnetic north? Like, why would that necessarily reverse the events that have transpired on the temporal plane into now, oh, they're all reversed and undone? Hated it.
I think this is just, screenwriter saying, well, you're thinking about it too hard. It's just, how do we show him turning back time? Well, he turns the world back the other way, and then he changes it back to normal again. He just turns the clock back 30 seconds so he can save Lois or whatever. But to your point, if he's going to do that, why doesn't he just go back a day to where he knows the plan, he knows what Luthor is going to do? Why don't they just stop him then?
I was going to bring this up later, but that gets to part of it as well, right? Even if you're going to do that from a plot standpoint, like, or a power standpoint, that he has this ability, why wouldn't he nip the entire plan in the bud? He goes back 5 minutes so that he can save one person specifically. We're talking about the kids on the Golden Gate Bridge whose bus are destroyed. The Golden Gate Bridge is going to have to get repaired. I mean, we got to assume the death toll from this event is in the tens of thousands at a minimum, probably more like hundreds of thousands dead. And all also that he can save one person while, like, to your point, he knows the plot. He could go back to the exact moment when bumbling ass Otis is underneath, the missiles, putting in the code or whatever to set those, and just show up there, take him to jail at that point. I suppose, now I'm thinking of this, they need to commit a crime for him to go to jail. So like they hadn't technically done anything wrong, but yeah, I mean, it was extremely confusing to me why, if you do have the ability to turn back time, just go all the way, man. I'm not saying go all the way back and kill Hitler or whatever. At least stop this missile attack from ever going down. It was very, very frustrating to me. I'm going to stew on that for a while, so we just need to move on. Let's talk now a little bit about casting and the heroes and villains in the film. As I mentioned before, I think Superman, like, this is like one of the definitive comic book performances of all time. Christopher Reeve as Superman. We don't need to get too much into that, but I would also say I am super impressed by Margot Kidder as Lois Lane. I think she's very funny. She's very charming. She has that late 70s independent woman feminist spirit about her. She's whip smart. She's not interested in kids. I think the way that she flirts with Superman on the date. Initially, I was a little like, why are these questions so personal to you, Lois Lane? Like, you have the chance to interview the first, flying being ever, and you're like asking him about like what he eats and is he got a boyfriend or a girlfriend and stuff. Like, it's like kind of a little bit embarrassing, honestly. But rewatching it, I mean, I think that scene again just kind of crackles with some sparks. I think they have excellent chemistry, the two actors. I really believe them as a couple. I think she's the second MVP honors in this film after Superman. What do you think?
Second MVP, I might actually give to Gene Hackman. I struggle with the Lois role a little bit. I feel like there hasn't quite been someone who has captured what Lois Lane should be in all the iterations we have of her. Amy Adams and I forget the name of the actress who played Lois in the
Kate Bosworth.
yeah. But I don't know. To me, like I feel like excuse me, I feel like Lois Lane should be more assertive, more headstrong, more serious about her career, and to see someone who's so easily swayed just because she's attracted to him, granted he's basically a god, but I don't know. It might have something to do with I was very used to seeing the Lois Lane from the animated version, and she's to me that's like the definitive version because they really nailed her character in that, I think. So
Interesting. Yeah, we're going to agree to disagree on that one because I think she's to me the definitive Lois Lane by a significant margin. I mean, I do think I see her point to a certain extent, but I also do think she's extremely like strong-willed, and we see a lot more of that I think in Superman 2, which we'll talk about in our next episode. But
yeah, you're right
um,
about that.
I think she does an amazing job with the character, and I think Margot Kidder, rest in peace. She had a pretty tragic life, and was also I think kind of somewhat typecast as a result of this film, and had some mental health struggles. But to me, like I said, I think she's easily the second best part of this film. Now you mentioned Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. I kind of went in thinking like from my first watch, like that's kind of bad casting. He doesn't really look like him. He has the hairpiece on the entire time. He's supposed to be like the smartest criminal mind and like one of the smartest men alive. And yet he's like, he has two oafish assistants as his like henchmen. What's going on with that? Rewatching it, I agree. Like Hackman is cooking in this role. I think he does a really good job of, we were criticizing Brando, and I think rightfully so for not giving a shit. But like Gene Hackman does actually give a shit. Like he does a good job of really bringing that Gene Hackman quality to this part. That is my issue. Is that I feel like it's just like Gene Hackman as opposed to the Lex Luthor character. And again, I feel like there's one thing that we look at Lex Luthor and we're like, this is your deal. It's his bald ass head. And I don't know what the deal was with that. I mean, it is kind of a funny stinger at the very end, but I don't think the little stinger was worth it. Like, just wear a bald cap, Gene Hackman. I mean, come on. Otherwise, I definitely enjoyed him in that role.
Yeah, they seem to be Hollywood seems to be adverse to having a bald character as a villain because I think that like Jesse Eisenberg also they gave him hair. When they bring Gene Hackman back for the other movies, I think he's wearing a hairpiece again, isn't he? Through the rest of the other movies
Yeah, I
too.
believe so. Yeah.
It's like we know he's bald now because of the stinger. Like, why don't you just make him look like the character should? And I know he's a controversial figure now, but I'm gonna go with Kevin Spacey as the definitive version of Lex Luthor. I think that they let him be bald the whole time. He looked great bald. He's the perfect villain for that role. I know I said that Gene Hackman is the number two in this role, but yeah, he's not the definitive Lex Luthor, I think.
I think this is a role that hasn't really been captured on film very well. I actually think if you're going to go across all Superman media, Michael Rosenbaum from Smallville is like number one. I think he's actually amazing in that part. And he plays him like really sympathetic in a lot of ways because he's sort of, his dad is kind of the big bully in that show. Have you watched Smallville, Mike?
I have not.
I had a good friend who was really into it, and so he gave me the DVDs back when we were still watching stuff on DVD, and it was kind of a good like late night background show while I was, doing other things. And but I did watch the full series, and yeah, I think Tom Welling's great as Superman or Clark Kent. They actually don't call him that until the very final episode. But yeah, I think if I was gonna be definitive Lex Luthor, I think it'd have to be the guy from Smallville. He does a great job and makes that character really complex. Jimmy Olsen in this doesn't have much to do at all. Very small role. I kept going like, where do I know this guy? Where do I know this guy? You know where we know this guy? He's Marty McFly's brother in Back to the Future. He'll go on to play Marty McFly's brother in just a few more years, his older brother.
Oh, of course. I can't believe I didn't see that either.
Yeah. But yeah, not a lot to do. I think Jackie Cooper is really fun as Perry White. I think he does a good job. He has a little bit more in the second movie, I think, or at least the beginning. Martha and Jonathan, again, they're just kind of really brief in this one. I wouldn't necessarily say either one of those are, to me, the definitive roles. And then we've already kind of criticized Jor-El. I think it's not even close. Like Russell Crowe is just a million times better in that part. Yeah, definitely not going to give Brando really. He got paid enough money. That's his reward for this movie.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I as bad as he is, and I this probably just comes from his disdain for doing a movie like this, but I don't know. I can't give him bad marks. He's Marlon Brando, man. He's one of the greatest actors of all time. Like, what am I gonna say? Like, oh, he's terrible in this movie.
That's a fair point, but I guess that actually just underscores my argument because like we've seen this man, as Don Corleone, or On the Waterfront, like he is considered one of the greatest actors of all time. And you watch this and you're like, this guy is just saying some words, standing around. Like I said, Christopher Reeve says something in the documentary of like, Brando couldn't even be bothered. I had nothing but contempt for him. Like Gene Hackman wanted to run lines with me, and like we were like committed to doing good together. And Brando is just like locked in his trailer, leave me alone. Obviously, they don't really have scenes together, so that's part of it. But I don't know. It's just very frustrating to see a man of his abilities just squandered in a movie like this. All right. Well, we're going to move on next to the production elements of the film. And I think we'll start with the director's vision, which is really, does the director kind of bring their own personal vision to the film? And is that a good thing necessarily? I would say yes. And it's an interesting fact around this. So there's in the lore around the film, there was one word that Richard Donner was very committed to when it comes to this. And that word, Mike, is verisimilitude. Do you know that word?
I need to bust out my dictionary. I think. Go ahead and tell me.
Verisimilitude is essentially the level of realism, right? And that they really wanted Superman to feel like it was set in the actual real world. And I think he does an exceptional job of that, especially the scenes in Metropolis in the second half of the film. I actually would argue that that word would kind of be the defining feature of all of Richard Donner's films. So I'll give you a short list of Richard Donner movies, and maybe you can tell me which one is your favorite. We've got The Omen, which was his film preceding this, and got him the job. He also directed The Goonies, as well as all the Lethal Weapon films. Actually, kind of retired really after the Lethal Weapon movies. His last film was 16 Blocks with my guy Mos Def and Bruce Willis. Actually, never seen that film myself, but he also directed Scrooged. He directed the TV spinoff or the TV adaptation Maverick with Mel Gibson, who he worked with quite frequently, and he also directed the Michelle Pfeiffer, Matthew Broderick fantasy epic Lady Hawk. Those are some of his deep cuts. Mike, what's your favorite Richard Donner movie besides Superman?
I think The Goonies is probably my favorite out of this list, but I was raised on The Omen, as odd as that sounds, that sentence is, but I think that's a great movie. I love Gregory Peck in that movie. But I think just as sheer fun entertainment and one of the most iconic things of all time, The Goonies, of course. I mean, come on, it's just that's a great movie.
Yeah, Goonies was a massive movie of my childhood. Obviously, being someone who was a kid in the 80s, we just love that. And, as I said, the idea of realism, I actually feel like that's one of the best representations of how kids actually behave with one another that's ever been on screen. They tease each other, they're kind of mean to each other, they're kind of always talking over each other. Everyone thinks that they're the smartest one and knows what's best to do. And I would also say, Lethal Weapon, I think a lot of people hold those movies in high esteem. Obviously, Mel Gibson has become an unfortunate figure. He's extremely charming in those movies. And I also feel that same level of realism, like it really feels like him and Danny Glover are genuinely like mismatched fun friends. I mean, there's a reason that buddy cop formula has kind of persevered. And that was one of the the early, examples of that formula, and the way that they really do have great chemistry with each other. And actually, I would say too, like Lethal Weapon 2, I think is the best of all of them. But even like Lethal Weapon 3 with Pesci has some funny moments. I mean, by 4, it's kind of worn out its welcome with Chris Rock, but they actually are all pretty entertaining in their own ways. And, they're not realistic movies necessarily, but the performances have this level of really like casual tossed off lines and realism. I actually think that he does have a really special sauce that he brings to movies, and I think you can even feel it here in Superman. One thing I found interesting in doing my research is that the cinematographer is Jeffrey Unsworth. He actually tragically died in October of 1978, just before the film's release. But this is the same man who was the cinematographer on the sci-fi classic 2001: A Space Odyssey. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting. He did a great job on that.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of feel some of that flavor in this as well. I really think it's a beautifully shot movie, Superman. I especially like the stuff in Smallville. They actually used Calgary, Canada for Smallville, Kansas in those sequences, and I actually think they did found a really great spot to do that. So he's an excellent cinematographer, and yeah, this is his last film before he passed away. So I think in terms of the production design and the world building, this is one thing that kind of bothered me a little bit. So the city is Metropolis. Everybody knows it's Metropolis. They don't even really try to hide the fact that it's just New York City. There's quite a bit of evidence for this. They fly past the Statue of Liberty on their date night, which is obviously a iconic New York City landmark. And then in the scene where Otis is being trailed by the cop and they go through like Grand Central Station, the train actually, like, you hear a conductor in the background being like, train stops in Albany and Buffalo. So like it's New York City. Now, it again didn't really bother me a ton, but I don't know. I kind of wish they had maybe just tried to make it a little less New York.
I mean, the only landmark that I can think of when I think Metropolis is the Daily Planet, that giant gold sphere on top of the building. I know in the comics, Metropolis is basically the stand-in for New York, so it only makes sense for them to do this. Sorry, people in New York. I know that you all call it Gotham, and you like to think that Batman is, based in New York as well, which, depending on the version that you watch, I guess it is. But for me, I mean, Metropolis is New York. That's it. And so it only makes sense for them to fly past the Statue of Liberty. But as long as they put that gold dome on the top of the Daily Planet, then I think we're set.
Fair enough. Let's talk about Secret Layers and Fortresses of Solitude. I love the Fortress of Solitude. I think it's an iconic design. I think it looks super cool. I like that it's very tactile. And actually, they built the whole set. It was a massive soundstage they built it on. So, huge fan of the Fortress of Solitude. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it looks really uncomfortable. I know in the second one he has a bed that we see in there, but everything's at a 45-degree angle, crystal. Everything looks very hard and cold. I guess that's the point when you're making an entire structure out of crystals. I mean, yeah, it's obviously a very impressive soundstage that they built on that. It's just, it doesn't have a lot of flair, I think. It's just everything just kind of looks like one solid background all the way around.
Not a lot of paintings and decor. He didn't really get an interior designer to help him like fill out the place.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a great design. I'm ragging on it a little bit harder than I should, but yeah, it's the Fortress of Solitude, man. Of course, everybody wants to go there.
I'll tell you this: I would actually prefer to take a trip to Lex Luthor's secret lair because that is really cool. I think that is actually maybe my favorite sort of setting in the whole film. I love like all the random trinkets he has everywhere, the busyness of it.
I think it definitely feels like it's an underground secret lair. I think it might have something to do with like the way that the water comes up where the steps are. There's that kind of pool that they have that feels like it's water coming up from like maybe the sewers or underground or something like that. But that I thought was a nice touch. It gave it a feel of it being underground. I also think that it's like the ultimate snobby rich guy decor. There's like
Absolutely.
busts, and the giant wood oak desk that he sits behind, and there's globes and things, and a lot of maps, of course. It's a great design. They nailed Lex Luthor. Just if you were to take his identity and put it into a place, this is like how much better can you get?
That's perfectly said. And I too thought the pool was super cool, a really cool design touch. I will say though, and you said it, what's going on with that water? Like you got to assume that that water is.
It's flooding in from somewhere else. I don't know.
I mean, hopefully he's got some pumps that are doing some serious filtration. But what I'm getting at, I have a feeling that place stink.
Yeah,
Like
if it's Metropolis sewer water, absolutely.
he's under the city. Like if you've ever been like near, even just being on the platforms on the subway platforms in New York, it is pretty rank down there. You're going below that level, and then there's some kind of water from someplace. I mean, he's got a cool look, and thankfully we don't have to smell what that place. And again, maybe he has some air filtration. You got to assume that he's a smart guy, filtering the water, filtering the air, but. I don't know. I just couldn't escape the thought that that place just absolutely stinks to high heaven.
You think he hired a bunch of contractors to come in and let's run some pipes down here. Let's make sure that the air vents are all up to code.
Absolutely. I'm assuming he did. Unfortunately, that was not in the script, but we are going to talk about the writing of the film. And I noticed a few different things. I think this is a very well written superhero film. First thing that caught my eye, Mike, the opening line. It's Jor-El when he's in the trial and he says, "This is no fantasy, no careless product of wild imagination." I think that's a very clever opening line for a superhero adaptation on the big screen. I also found, and we alluded to this before, that there's an iconic. It comes from the TV series The Adventures of Superman that was in the '50s, starring George Reeves, and it's the opening of Superman. So what they say is, "Look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman." And then the narrator comes in and says, "Yes, it's Superman, a strange visitor from another planet who came to Earth with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. Superman, who can change the course of mighty rivers, bend steel in his bare hands, and who, disguised as Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter for the great metropolitan newspaper, fights a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way." Depending on your age, that is kind of just stuck in your brain always is one of the great sort of character introductions in TV history. What I found really cool is that they found multiple ways to incorporate those iconic lines into the film. So he catches the bullet, proving that he's faster than a speeding bullet. He doesn't do anything with the train. It's not like he proves he's more powerful, but he does race a train. So they're
No, no, no. He at the end when California's falling apart, he lays down on the railroad track and the train goes over him. So I think that's kind of more powerful than a locomotive.
okay. There you go. And do you notice what else he does right before that train comes to him? He bends steel with his bare hand to like one of the tracks is like broken. So he bends the steel with his bare hands. And then he does change the course of a mighty river when it's flooding and, about to take out the whole town. Like he does all of the things that are in that show's intro that makes him so special. He does not, and I don't believe, jump over a building in a single bound at any point. But if you can show him flying, like that kind of beats jumping over buildings, right? So that one's kind of a wash. And yeah, he does fight for truth, justice, and the American way. Although he does kind of lie to Miss Tessmacher. He says, "I can't lie to you." And then he does something that directly contradicts what he told her. I can't remember the exact thing, but yeah, he does kind of lie. There's that, but there's also kind of themes where his dad says, Jor-El says, "You cannot interfere with the events of human history." We have one of the most catastrophic missile attacks in the history of, America. I mean, this would have been like the biggest thing of the 20th century if it had actually gone down. He still lets that go down, so I guess he doesn't actually intervene directly with that, but it kind of does show that he will bend his moral code a little bit if needed. Now, it's not like he's out here breaking the bad guy's neck, unlike some versions of Superman that we know. But I just did find that the writing was very clever in sort of taking the things that audiences, especially of the '70s, would be familiar with, and then literalizing them on screen. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out here, and I wouldn't say this is a particularly deep movie, despite the Superman is Jesus discussion we had earlier. That being said, I actually think that the keystone for the whole film is the introduction. So basically, as soon as the movie starts, there's like a Superman reel that's like on like an old time movie screen, right? And they're like talking about the character being invented in the 30s. Like it sort of breaks the myth, and it's kind of introducing him, right, as a character. And then the movie pulls out from beyond even the square aspect ratio there and into the title theme and the credits, right? I think that is the essence of the entire film. That what is Superman really about? It's about the power of movies to show us things that we've never seen before and take us places we could never imagine. Now, that's not especially deep and it's kind of a meta theme, but fitting for a movie whose poster is promising some visual effects extravaganza. I do think that that is the essence of what Superman's about. What do you think about that?
I think it's kind of heralding in a new age of cinema in a way. I mean, they didn't realize it at the time, I don't think, but showing us that a man can fly is just the start. We're going to see along the next couple of decades here more than that. We're going to see a man bit by a spider who can swing through the cityscapes. We're going to see a man who wields a magic hammer and can shoot lightning from it, travel back in time to defeat a purple alien. This is where it all begins. And so I think maybe intentionally to a degree that they're showing us, what we're taking down on a comic book page, we're going to put up on screen. And this is the very beginning of that. So I think that's what it's really about.
Yep, I totally agree. It's what is Superman about? It's about the power of movies themselves. Let's talk briefly about Superman's costume and secret identity. So I think the costume is good. My only issue is that the S on the back is like not filled in with more color. Like it's just the S symbol. It's like on his cape. It's not like actually rendered in full color, which I just found like kind of an odd choice. I don't know why they wouldn't add a little more flair to that. Otherwise, I think actually Christopher Reeve looks kind of amazing in that costume, especially given kind of how capes are famously kind of difficult to pull off in real life when it comes to these types of adaptations. I actually think he does a pretty good job of it.
I think it does to a degree just look like spandex for what they're the source material that they were adapting. It's kind of hard to envision. Well, is this like a form fitting leather, or is this like if they're trying to be practical to what the actor can do on screen while also making it true to the comics? And it might look a little bit like a Halloween costume at times, but I think Christopher Reeve is what sells it.
Let's talk his secret identity as Clark Kent. Now, this has long been one of the real big criticisms around the Superman character. I think that's fair to a certain extent. He doesn't wear any kind of mask. And so if you know Clark Kent, wouldn't you just immediately be like, oh, that's just you without glasses on? I can appreciate that. I will say, I actually think this is where Christopher Reeve is phenomenal. He is so good at Clark Kent and at making him clumsy and awkward. Like he's socially awkward. He's bumping into stuff. He's got his big glasses on. He just does not come off as really heroic. He even kind of slunches his shoulders. There is a scene in the documentary about him where his son is talking about how the best scene in the entire Superman franchise is the one where he's with Lois after their date and he's like, he comes back as Clark Kent and he's like, am I still going to take you out tonight? And she's like, oh yeah, sure, just a sec. And she goes in the other room to change and he stands for a minute and he like rehearses revealing that he's Superman and he goes from the like hunched shoulders of Clark Kent to standing like fully erect, and you really see that transformation take place in just his posture and his demeanor. And then he kind of chickens out and goes back to being Clark Kent and doesn't reveal until, spoiler alert, the second movie what's going on. But I would say that it's not a super effective disguise, and I think in real life we probably put it together like pretty quickly. I think it's better than it should be. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it works. The entire idea around Clark Kent is based around his demeanor, his attitude, like you said, slouching and hunching his shoulders over. It's not just about putting on glasses. There's more to the costume to that. It's about giving people a reason to doubt any reason, like why would he be Superman? That guy's a total dweeb, you know. And I pulled a comic off my bookshelf here, Superman Birthright, because they address it specifically in here. There's a specific scene where Clark and his mom are discussing how he's going to hide himself in plain sight every day. He's wearing a t-shirt and they say, no, we got to get rid of that. You can see your abs through your shirt. You look too strong. And they give him a collared shirt and a jacket to go over it. Comb your hair. Don't, you know, comb it a certain way. Make it go down. Change your voice so that you sound softer and weaker than you actually are. Don't stand up straight, you know, things like that. So I think it's more than just glasses, and that's why it works for me. The biggest thing for me is his boots. Where does he hide his boots? He's got his costume on underneath. You know, where is he just carrying his boots around with him at all time? I don't understand that. Never have.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I didn't really thought about the boots, but yeah, I mean, you said it. I think even the voice here, Christopher Reeve does such a good job of kind of turning Clark Kent to kind of talk like this a little bit nasally and like almost Kermit the Froggy a little bit. I noticed at times.
100%.
Right? Like,
Frog, yeah.
yeah, he really does like a very nasal kind of voice. And yeah, I was very impressed with his ability to kind of embody those exact things you're just referencing in the comic. That actually leads us to the perfect transition to our final category, the overall comicness of the movie. And specifically, does this make you want to read the comics further? I would say that this is an emphatic yes. I think it's a huge win in terms of drawing you into the character, making you want to know more about him by getting into the comics and just kind of seeing, like, I think the representation of who the comic book version of Superman is, despite my many grievances around the power sets and things like that. I think it really does capture the essence of Superman, the character, very well. They really had to work closely with DC and kind of promise them that they would like not stray too far from the comic books in order to get the rights to this movie. And I think they actually did an excellent job of that. So, Mike, what are your thoughts on that? And then we'll talk about our favorite Superman comic. Why don't you lead us into that too?
It almost just kind of scratches the surface of Superman as a whole. You know, you said earlier that it takes a long time for them to actually reveal Clark as Superman. I think it's like 40 minutes in for us to get to that point. So we don't get a lot of time with Superman in this movie. It kind of leaves you wanting more. And I think comics are a good source material to go back to get that. As far as the favorite Superman comic, it's a bit of a deep cut, but my favorite Superman comic is called Red Sun, which is an alternate storytelling of where instead of landing in Kansas as a baby, he lands in Soviet Russia and is raised to be a communist. And he's kind of the Ubermensch figure there. And America lives in fear of what this man can do, almost like a nuclear bomb kind of allegory. They don't know if they're going to send him over to destroy our side of the world or not at any point. And then it goes from there, but it has a fantastic ending. It's kind of mind blowing what they do in the story of Superman Red Sun. That's my number one.
Yeah, it's a great pick. I've read that comic as well. I absolutely loved it. And without spoiling it, like really awesome surprise ending to that comic as well, even beyond the sort of high concept premise. It actually does a very cool ending to that as well. I'm gonna actually say Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman. I know this is one of the more acclaimed Superman comics. It's certainly not a deep cut, but I think it really captured the essence of the character in an amazing way. It's basically about Superman is actually getting poisoned by overexposure to the sun. So he knows that he has a limited time left. It's almost like he has cancer. So he's kind of wrapping up his life on Earth, you know, closing all the things and finally like coming out to Lois. It's a really beautiful and heartfelt comic. It has a lot of deep cut characters. and references for the hardcore Superman heads. Quite frankly, a lot of that stuff went way over my head. I didn't actually understand it, but it's a testimony to the storytelling that not knowing all of those characters, I could still really enjoy it. Highly recommend All Star Superman, and I love the cover as well. That image of him sitting on the cloud, kind of looking into the like camera with this sort of serene, tranquil look on his face. Just an absolutely, I think, iconic, maybe my favorite single image of Superman in all of comics. So yeah, with a shout out to Red Sun as well as Doomsday. One was probably one of the first comics I read as a kid. I definitely would go with All Star Superman. All right, well, let's wrap it up. Like I said, just a couple airings of grievances. I kind of went through mine earlier. The one other I would just add, well, two others I would add. So Lex Luthor's plan just kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. Like this guy clearly has a lot of architectural genius. He built an entire secret layer like right under their noses in Metropolis. Like if you have that level of knowledge and expertise around architecture and development, like why do you need to blow up half of California to just because you bought a bunch of land that's like not even really like the fertile, I guess it is kind of fertile in certain parts of the central California, but like it feels like there's better ways to do it than that. I don't know. That kind of bugs me.
I think they do something similar with Lex Luthor, and in the third one as well. He has some kind of land plan that he's working on, their real estate plan. He does it in Superman Returns. He with Kevin Spacey. I'm a little tired of seeing Lex Luthor just work on his real estate business. There's other villains out there that they can do. I personally am looking forward to the day where we get a Superman versus Brainiac movie. I would love to see that on screen. I think that's a perfect villain for him to battle. So
Heck
hopefully we'll get
yeah.
something like that soon.
Yeah, I think the other one that bothers me, and maybe he learned this from his father Jor-El, but Superman just takes Lex Luthor and Otis and just drops them into jail. Like they haven't been on trial. There was no actual, they weren't convicted. I mean, to be fair, they are guilty of that crime. It's indisputable. It's an absolutely monstrous crime. They, as I mentioned, are responsible for the death of, at a minimum, tens of thousands of people. But the ending of the movie, he just drops them off in jail, and they're like, "Thanks a lot, Superman. We'll take it from here." They don't get trial. They don't, have their, fair day in court. That's not the middle word is justice, Mike. Where's the justice in
That's a
that,
great
man?
point.
Where's the justice there?
Yeah, he's allowed to a fair trial with a jury of his peers, I think.
You got to be a little better. Again, like a little too much Kryptonian justice in that one for me. All right, so we end each episode with our final verdict on the film. We have six options, and boy, comic book movies certainly run this gamut. We got terrible, bad, okay, good, great, and classic. Mike, Superman the movie 1978. What do you give it?
It's a classic. I mean, it has its shortcomings, of course. Not everything about it is great, but there's so many iconic aspects of this movie, from Christopher Reeve to the suit to the costumes and the sets and everything. And Marlon Brando's bad acting aside, I think that entire intro is iconic. Just in general, you cannot give this movie anything but classic, I think.
Totally agree. I mean, it's almost like, what are we even doing here making a superhero podcast if we're like, I thought it was okay. It's just like, no, this is a classic movie. Sets the template, as I mentioned, for almost all superhero movies to come. Iconic performance, iconic lead actor, and a really heartfelt and very rewatchable movie. I felt like too, every time I watched it, I enjoyed it more with each viewing, to be honest. And that is one of the hallmarks, I think, of a good comic book movie, is that you really enjoy it more. It's a movie you want to kind of spend more time with and come back to and rewatch. And yeah, this is absolutely the definition of a classic movie. Now, we like to get out of here with just a quick little additional viewing for other people who, maybe are a little younger than us and they haven't seen some of the other films. Now, we're not going to recommend in this part comic book movies because obviously we'll be discussing those. We are both big fans of all types of cinema. So, Mike, why don't you get us started? Recommend a film that's connected to this that you would love viewers to check out.
I think with this movie being very lighthearted, and fun and good for the whole family. I'm actually going to go to the opposite end of that spectrum and go with Richard Donner's prior movie that he made to this, The Omen. We talked about it a little bit. I think it's a great film. It's a great horror movie. Gregory Peck is amazing in that role. Also has a lot of iconic elements just with Damien in general, and 666 and The Mark of the Beast and things like that all come from this movie. It's one of the great horror movies of all time, I would say. So it may not be a good double feature for this movie, but if you're looking for a good horror movie from the 70s to watch, The Omen is a fantastic pick.
It's an excellent recommendation. I really watched it I'd kind of seen bits and pieces, but really sat down to watch it closely for the first time, I think really within the last year or two. And it is a great movie. It is very scary. Gregory Peck, as you said, is excellent. It's one of the rare movies that has kind of a kid in a big role that actually, he does a good job and is quite disturbing. And yeah, the original Omen by Richard Donner, excellent suggestion. I'm going to go with what I kind of consider somewhat of a deep cut from Gene Hackman, and that would be The Conversation, his film he made with Francis Ford Coppola. Now, this is a kind of a deep cut for both of them. I mean, relatively speaking, for two hugely successful 70s icons, but Gene Hackman has role is basically he overhears the titular conversation, the themes around being constantly surveilled and people watching your every move and feeling this sense of people kind of always spying on you and even sharing that information. Very resonant themes for a movie that's sort of has a technological center around like a super powerful microphone. It's a really great film, and like I said, it's kind of a deep cut for both Francis Ford Coppola and Gene Hackman. So if you haven't seen it, highly recommend checking out The Conversation. Well, speaking of conversations, that brings our debut episode of Superhero Cinema Club to a close. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Follow us on all the social medias that will be listed in the show notes. Come back and see us next week when we discuss Superman 2. Thanks, Mike. This was fun.
Absolutely. I had a great time. I'm looking forward to many more conversations around further superhero films and Superman 2.
Superman 2. There's a lot of drama and backstory for that one too to get into, and we will be discussing both the original Superman 2 and the Richard Donner cut. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for tuning in, y'all.
Superhero Cinema Club is hosted by Mark Schiff and me, Mike Karns. Produced by Mark Schiff. Editing by Mike Karns. Original music provided by Chris Karns. Find him on Spotify. Be sure to follow us on social media. You can find us at Superhero Cinema Club, and don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a review. Join us next time as we dive into another epic adventure from the world of superhero cinema.